Leonard Ulrich is a teacher, a woodworker who received his double major in Western history, experienced what he describes as a mentally violent 3-day period in 2005, which became a pivotal point in his life. It was at that point in his life when he realized that he knew that his skills as a teacher, amateur historian, prophecy enthusiast, builder, and technician had to be put to good use. And Leonard's contention is that evil in this world is being supernaturally directed toward the emergence of Antichrist in the very near future, and that the time has come to resist evil as never before. Step one, of course, is to recognize what's happening, which sadly to many professing Christians do not. New World Order, secret societies, and biblical prophecy is the topic of today's show. Joining us from his home in Canada, please join me in welcoming Canadian researcher Leonard Ulrich to the show. Welcome, Leonard.
Hello, Cheryl.
To begin, let's flash back to 2005. Can you please describe for me the details of what you describe as a mentally violent period in your life? What happened?
Well, it's quite simple. When you have invested 8 years of your life into a particular paradigm, a way of viewing the world, which is that history happens by random chance and random forces, and then you confront something that you see on the internet, which was at the time, 9/11 was an inside job, you look at it and you just laugh. And then someone who's trained in history like myself says, okay, this should be pretty easy to disprove. And you look at it, and then one thing leads to the other. You realize maybe what I was taught wasn't exactly the truth. Not because my teachers were involved in some kind of conspiracy, but merely because they didn't know any better. And I didn't know any better. So I had to unlearn 8 years of training and experience as a history teacher and have that view of the world shattered and then reconstruct that view according to what I now know was always in the Bible all the time.
Now, wait a minute. Now, you go back to 9/11 was an inside job. How did you come to that conclusion?
Oh, I could spend 3 hours on that topic, but I'll just give you 3 bullet points. Number one, mechanically, Building 7, which was a 47-story building right next to the Twin Towers, collapsed on September 11th, 2001, even though it was not, I repeat, not hit by a plane and not splashed by burning jet fuel. And yet it manages to telescope down into its own footprint and explode in a pile of dust. Now, this should concern any builder or architect because this would be the first time ever in history that a steel-framed building has collapsed allegedly due to fire.
Wow, amazing. Now, is it said, I think I heard this somewhere along the line, maybe it was in one of your videos, did a pilot receive an award for a project that he had done during 9/11?
Yes. Major Rick Gibney was given an award in secret for his secret mission on 9/11. Now, that's kind of curious because he would be one of only 4 pilots who were guarding the entire northeast coast of the United States at the time, because all other jets were conveniently scrambled to northern Canada to fight imaginary Russian targets in a war games exercise. Cheryl, there were no less than 21 military projects or military exercises diverting the force of the U.S. military away from New York, and within New York just so happened to be simulating an event where a plane hits the Twin Towers at the exact same time when the real thing occurred. Now, if you want to chalk that up to coincidence, be my guest. But a hole-in-one in golf is considered to be 1,000,000 to 1 odds. So what are the odds that a plane gets hijacked and hits the Twin Towers twice, essentially? while there's a military exercise going on of the exact same thing at the exact same time, at the exact same place.
Yes. Now, who do you think made the call as far as 9/11 goes? Who's responsible for this? If it's not a terrorist act, who's responsible?
Well, that's a great question. And the key to knowledge is asking the right question. So let me take that question and slightly modify it. Because in order to understand who's responsible, you have to look at who stands to gain. The Romans had the phrase qui bono, which means who stands to gain. Well, it's not going to be anyone in the Arab world because, if the United States military and the NATO allies decided to do a number on the Middle East in response to 9/11 like they did, then there would be no gain to anyone in the Middle East. So you got to discount even the radical fundamentalists that we are all trained to be scared of. And you have to ask, well, who benefits? Well, it just so happens in my movie that I published, or I put on the screen a article from the London Guardian saying that conveniently, just so happens that the brother of Osama bin Laden met with George Bush Sr. in 9/11 on September 11th, 2001, to discuss an arms deal through the Carlyle Group, in which both the Bush Sr. and bin Laden's brother are members of. Now, I think that's just a little suspicious.
Wow. Now, what is it? Now, who was employed? Was it a Bush that was employed at the Twin Towers and left the Twin Towers the day prior to 9/11? What was that about?
Wirt D. Walker III, who is part of the Bush family on the mother's side, Dorothy Walker, was employed by Securicom Stratesec on the board of directors for securing the Twin Tower complex, which is a total of 7 buildings, not just 2. And conveniently, Securicom Stratesec's contract with the World Trade Center complex conveniently expired on September 10th, 2001.
Yeah, that is convenient.
Yeah, that's just the third coincidence. Now, I could go down a list and give you 30 coincidences, and I'll eventually ask you a question, which is, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it might be a duck.
Right. So you're not a conspiracy theorist at all. What is your mission in sharing this information with the public?
My mission is really about the 3 goals or the 3 big ideas which run through all of my planned 4 series of videos. I've released the first video. I want to release the second by the end of the year. And those 3 big ideas are the following. Most of the evil in this world is highly coordinated and is fulfilling biblical prophecy to the letter. And big idea number 2 is historical and current events are being influenced by evil to make the appearance of the Antichrist highly probable within a generation. And big idea number 3 is, although the world is not yet in an apocalyptic state, the forces of organized evil affect us all now and must be resisted like never before. Now, these ideas are so radical and kind of discomforting that most people wouldn't want to look a second look at them. But for those who are curious as to, why is the world's economy grinding down? Why are we getting involved in more and more wars? Why is there more and more strife and uncertainty in the world? Well, for those people who are in the minority, by the way, who want answers to those questions, then they'll take a look at my movie, and then the big ideas will sink in. And then hopefully they'll change their lives and quit watching Dancing with the Stars and get on to real issues.
Now, how do you feel about the media? I mean, do you feel the media is more accurate? When you watch TV and you're watching the news, do you think the newscasters in general are giving you an accurate report, or do you feel that they're in the cahoots as well? What's up with that?
Oh, I could spend an hour talking about that and not even cover that question. The short answer is most reporters are repeaters. They toe the company line. So even though they know that they're not giving the correct answer or all of the answer, they just recite their lines. They look into the teleprompter and into the camera. They say what they need to say, and they go home because, you know what? They got mortgages to pay. They got car loans to pay. They got furniture loans and vacation loans to pay for. They're extended their credit to the max like everybody else. And that is how the game works. Even if I was a small-time reporter and I found that a local company was dumping chemicals into the river, and I bring up the story to my editor, and the editor tells me, well, we're not going to run that story because this company gives us a lot of advertising revenue. Right there, I've just proven my point as to how the media can be controlled. So it's controlled from within by people who know they know better, but they have bills to pay for. And it's controlled from without by the almighty dollar.
Now, are the major networks, are they owned by, I mean, is there someone above the major networks that control what goes in and comes out of the TVs and radios?
Absolutely, 100%. I'll give you two examples. Fox News is part of News Corp or News Corporation, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. A couple years back, about 3 years ago, a reporter asked Rupert Murdoch flat out, did you try to change the public perception of the war on terror? And Rupert Murdoch flat out said, yes. And then he paused for a second or two to realize the gravity of what he just said. And then he quickly added a disclaimer, oh, but it didn't work. In other words, he enjoyed telling the truth, but then he added the disclaimer at the end of it to, of course, deny the impact of what he just said. And I'll give you another case or example. CNN is a wholly owned subsidiary of General Electric. And General Electric has many divisions, one of which is the arms industry. You know, General Electric brings good things to life. And whenever I hear that jingle in my mind, I think of an exploding bomb. So CNN is not going to give you the correct view of the war on terror. Fox News is not going to give you the correct view of the war on terror. And as a matter of fact, the news is controlled to such an extent that the business of news gathering is generally subcontracted to the wire services. So if you really want to control the news networks, you have to start at the wire services. And guess what? One of the two major wire services is called Reuters. You've probably heard about it. And Reuters provided BBC One, BBC Two, and Fox News the story that Building 7 collapsed before it collapsed. Now, how would they know that?
Wow.
That's right. How would three individual networks, BBC One, BBC Two, and CNN, all be reporting on the collapse of Building 7 before it collapsed?
That is chilling.
Yes.
Wow. I'm talking to Leonard Ulrich. He is a Canadian researcher, and he has got a lot of information for us. If you got questions for Leonard, give us a call. The number's 815-964-8830. You're listening to Speak Now Live.
I use the term New World Order generally. It's kind of like saying Christians. And of course, you can divide Christians into all kinds of camps, and you can divide the New World Order into all kinds of camps. But I use the term New World Order to describe all the individual groups and peoples that are pining and arranging a one world religion, one world government, one world military, one world society, and one world currency. Okay, well, we all can tell each other what the approximate worth of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett is, because we can look into, say, securities filings, and we can discover how many $1 billion, say, Bill Gates has. But we can't tell how much the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Windsors own. And there's a very good reason, because Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are in the billionaire class, but the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Windsors are in the trillionaire class. And the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Windsors are at the apex of the pyramid of power that rules the world, because they came up with the central banking system that dominates pretty well everything on this planet, and has been doing so for the past 200 years. Because one of the major points in my film is that every major war for the past 200 years has been funded on both sides by this modern financial system. And that's a huge claim. And it takes me about 20 minutes to explain the evidence behind that in my film. Well, I would say the 12 disciples don't exist anymore, but they gave birth to, or they were the original group that started a whole philosophy, if you will, called Christianity. It's the same thing with the Illuminati. The Illuminati proper did exist about 200 years ago, and they were only a short-lived group, but they gave birth to, or they founded, a philosophy which is affecting us to this day. So yes, the Illuminati were real, and yes, the Illuminati are real, because there are people in the world who follow the exact same philosophy that the Illuminati did back 230 years ago in Germany. Yes, but that's only half the story. The other half is Michael Jackson's willing participation in that plan. There is no way that you can look at the cover art for several of Michael Jackson's albums and not come away concluding that there is a demonic influence associated with Jackson's music. And this is especially true when you do your own research, and you realize that Michael Jackson took medication to go into a deep sleep for days, and that this deep sleep process was one of 3 ways that Jackson admits by his own hand, or his own mouth as it were, that he received the inspiration for many of his hit songs. The other was climbing a tree called the Giving Tree on his residence. And the other one was going into a room of mirrors in such a way that Jackson said was designed to contact the spirit of Liberace. Now, whether or not the spirit of Liberace showed up is a matter of debate. I can't answer that, but I do know that if you are open to building a structure that you believe gets you in contact with spirits from the other side, then maybe you might actually get in contact with spirits from the other side disguising themselves as Liberace. So, to answer your question directly, Michael Jackson was both a victim and a willing participant in the Illuminati desire to destroy all structure in society. One of those structures is the family structure and morality. No, they're willfully ignorant because it doesn't conform with their padded pews, their climate-controlled churches, and their 60-inch flat screens at home with surround sound. In other words, they'd have to use the mind God gave them and read the Bible, which is something nobody ever does anymore, and discover that evil has always been in existence in the world since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, and that evil is organized. I'll just give you just one verse to prove that point from the Bible. It's Micah 2, verse 1. It says, "Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. And they covet fields and they take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. In other words, Cheryl, there really are people, according to the Bible, not me, according to the Bible, who sit in their beds and they plan evil, and at first light, they get up and they carry out their plans because they can. And they take property by violence, and they oppress individuals and even their heritage so that they don't even know who they are. Now, I'm not saying this. The Bible is saying this. And yet, here's the ironic part. I can quote you verse after verse after verse in the Bible that proves what I'm saying. And Christians give me this deer in the headlights look, like they're totally dazed. I do believe that because my film is subtitled the Matthew 24 film for a reason. Every single frame in that video is there intentionally. The film is done in 3 different levels: a basic level, an intermediate level with the visuals, and then there's a 3rd level, which is the symbology, which I show. And only those who are really advanced can understand the meanings that are compressed within symbols. Confucius said that people don't rule the world, signs and symbols rule the world. And he was so right, because you know what? You asked a question, are we close? And I would say, yeah, we really are, because evil's in our face and we don't even recognize it anymore. I'll give you 2 examples very quickly in 20 seconds. Number 1, Israel, the creation of Israel in 1948. That was talked about in Matthew 24. Jesus said, when you see the fig tree bear fruit, know that you are very close to the time of the end. And what is the symbol of Israel? One of the symbols is the fig tree. So, it is historically and culturally so improbable that you would see the recreation of Israel and the people within its borders speaking an ancient language. This is so bizarre. Do the Egyptians write in hieroglyphics today? No. Do the Italians write in Latin today? No. Do the people of Iraq write in Sanskrit anymore? No. But the people of Israel speak a 4,000-year-old language. It's so bizarre. Only God could coordinate that. And yet evil is in our face and we don't even recognize it. Like, take the logo for Apple computers. What is the logo? Well, it's an apple with a bite out of it. Now, what does that symbolize? Well, that symbolizes the fall of man. And that symbol isn't there by accident. It's there intentionally, because Steve Jobs admitted that taking LSD was one of the most important things he ever did in his life. And that gave him inspiration for many of the products and the design behind him, which is at the core of an ultra successful company, which is being used to essentially spy on you. Every single phone call you make from an Apple computer or Apple phone is logging your conversation. The webcam can be turned on and off at will without you knowing it. This is all part of the big brother, all-seeing eye, if you will, that is going to rule the world. And it has always been talked about in the Bible, but we just didn't recognize it until now. Well, you know what? It's funny because I'm using Apple products to essentially use the enemy's weapons against itself. If anybody doubts what I've just said about Steve Jobs and Apple Computer, just keep in mind that I will, in Volume 4, show the article in The Economist, which says, and I quote, Steve Jobs, comma, an ardent practitioner of the occult, comma, and need I say any more? So here we have 2 references. And the Apple Computer was founded on April 1st, 1976, which is April Fool's Day, The joke is on us. Ha ha ha. And the Apple one originally sold for, you guessed it, $666.66. I mean, yeah. So all the signs are right in your face. But if you talk about it, you're a conspiracy theorist because you're making things up that don't exist. Yes, and it's a 4-part series. I originally was going to reduce the series to 3 parts, but part 1 is almost 2.5 hours long because it has to be, because it covers so much ground that people typically email me and say, I had to watch the thing 3 or 4 times just to figure out all that you were saying. And that's a typical reaction. So volume 2 is going to be shorter and has a tighter focus. And it's subtitled The Illusion of Money, because money is an illusion. I had to relearn what money is and what money does. Volume 1 was entitled The New World Order, because you have to introduce the topic, and then also Wars and Rumors of Wars. So it lets you know what the New World Order is and where it came from and where it's going and how it funds both sides of every major war for 200 years. Volume 2 is going to be about the illusion of money. And then volume 3 is going to be about total control. And then volume 4, which if I ever get around to it in about 3 or 4 years from now, will be about the New World Religion and the Great Deception. I mean, it covers everything. It covers the links between the Nephilim and the burgeoning UFO movement and spiritual activities like shamanism and necromancy, etc. I mean, it covers everything that Christians are curious about but don't want to talk about. That is correct. You can watch it free in one file in high definition, so it looks every bit as good as cable TV. Yeah, I mean, Eisenhower in 1960 created a phrase which sums it all up, which is the military-industrial complex. Now, for a 2-term Republican former president, a 4-star general, the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, to say that, I mean, there's nobody on planet Earth who is more qualified to say the exact opposite of what he did than Eisenhower, but he created the phrase military-industrial complex on live TV in 1960. And that should have screamed, motive to everybody back in the 1960s for why the United States got involved in a stupid, useless civil war in Asia, and how the attack on the Maddox was totally and completely contrived by McNamara. Well, it depends what you mean by necessary. Without knowing it, Cheryl, you've opened up a huge can of worms, and that can of worms is called the oil dollar. Now, the United States, ever since 1945, has had the luxury of being, with the exception of Pearl Harbor, untouched by World War II, and had the reward bestowed on it by the international community for being the deciding factor of World War II by allowing the US dollar to be the world's reserve currency. Now, the average person doesn't know or doesn't care about what that means, but they should, because having the US dollar as the world's reserve currency means that every time somebody in China wants to buy a barrel of oil from somebody in Saudi Arabia, they have to use the US dollar. Now, that creates an artificial demand for the US dollar. And as we all know from Economics 101, the price of something goes up when the demand for something goes up. So your US dollar as a world's reserve currency has been king of the hill since 1945. And ever since Vietnam and Nixon taking your nation off of the gold standard in 1971, there is every reason for every nation on the earth besides the United States for wanting to get out of the world's reserve currency. Now, two of those nations just happen to be Iraq and Libya. Now, Saddam Hussein wanted to sell his oil in euros because they were worth more at the time than the United States dollar. Big mistake. The US dollar since 1971 has been backed by nothing. It is just a fancy piece of paper which you work for, which is produced by a private bank known as the United States Federal Reserve, who whips up money out of thin air at no cost to them and causes the entire planet to work for nothing. Okay, and if somebody like Saddam Hussein doesn't like it and thinks that they can get more value for a different piece of paper, then they're going to go for the euro. But America cannot allow that because that would decrease the demand for the US dollar, which would decrease the value of the US dollar. So guess what? Even though the United States dollar is backed by nothing, in other words, it isn't backed by gold or oil or wheat or something, it's actually backed by the United States military, who will force nations to take it even if they don't want it. Like take Libya, for example. When Muammar Gaddafi was still alive, he was really pushing for a gold-backed North African dinar. In other words, a currency which would hold its value, not like pieces of paper which are steadily devaluing, and you're being robbed in slow motion. So guess what? The former terrorist of North Africa, who became the darling of the United States back in the 1980s when he allegedly reformed himself, suddenly became the new Saddam Hussein of North Africa. Suddenly became part of the war on terror because he didn't like the declining purchasing power of the United States dollar. And he was pushing for a gold-backed North African currency. I mean, that would also have really put a damper on the United States dollar value. So the so-called rebels overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, and some of those rebels were admittedly Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan and from Iraq, which the United States helped. Are you getting the irony here? Yeah, to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, all because he didn't want the United States dollar. And as Gaddafi was being overthrown, 44 tons of gold were conveniently stolen from his vaults in Libya, which were held by the people, and these so-called uneducated, barbaric, Al-Qaeda backed by the United States rebels, the first thing that they did was establish a Western-connected central bank in Libya. Wow, that was a real priority to free the people from Libya, right? That is extremely revealing. I'm glad you brought up that subtlety. I'm quite impressed. That's really, that's good because everyone right now is concerned with the breakup of Tom Cruise and his wife there in Hollywood. But yeah, I don't consider that a priority. Thank you very much. No, that conversation between Obama and Medvedev is extremely revealing because that indicates at least a confidence to the point of being overconfident on behalf of Obama on being reelected. Now, I have been trying to figure out as a researcher Obama for the past 5 years, ever since before he announced his candidacy. Let me tell you, Cheryl, I have never, ever been able to find out so little about any of your presidents, ever. And that scares me. I do not have access to his Illinois state senator records because they're sealed. I do not have access to his master's thesis because it's sealed. I do not have access to his birth certificate because it's sealed. All I have is a receipt for his birth certificate, which, by the way, contains so many forgeries that I would be embarrassed if somebody in junior high tried to pass that off to me as an official receipt for a birth certificate instead of the real certificate. I do not have access to so many things, not even his marriage certificate I don't have access to. Now, these are all typically public things which researchers like myself rely on to try to build a profile. And it doesn't exist. There's no data on this man. He has spent millions of dollars sealing anything about himself. And you know what? I now think I have the complete picture. I was prepared to release a video saying that he, in fact, was born in Kenya, but I'm thankful that I didn't because I now realize that was a giant ruse, a giant smokescreen, a giant rabbit trail. I do believe he was born in Hawaii, and I do believe that he is the illegitimate child of a diehard communist. Well, I was just saying that I now do believe that the entire Obama was born in Kenya story, which was deliberately leaked by Michelle Obama on video at least twice, is entirely manufactured. This is a classic CIA deflection technique to hide the real truth, which is that Barack Obama's father was a diehard communist by the name of Frank Marshall Davis. Now, if you look at Dreams of My Father, there's so many anomalies that pop out at the average educated person that you cannot trust it at all. Number one, which is Obama's publisher for 16 years now realizes, or now had to admit that the Kenyan birth certificate story was entirely manufactured. So when your publisher for 16 years has to admit under pressure finally that this major part of your main subject story is totally false, you got a problem. And number two, the alleged father of Barack Obama, anthropologically, physically, looks nothing like Obama. I mean, there's no way that Obama's mother and that alleged person from Kenya could have produced Barack Obama. But if you look at Frank Marshall Davis and Barack Obama, you can see the structural identities. I mean, it's all there anthropologically. And in Dreams of My Father, Barack Obama admits in an encoded fashion that he went to see this special person in Hawaii that taught him politics and life. And you know what? That was Frank Marshall Davis, in my opinion, who produced Barack Obama with his mother. And Barack Obama's mother was CIA. And get a load of this. Barack Obama's mother was employed by Timothy Geithner's father. I mean, 30 years later, nothing's changed, right? I mean, it's the same people one generation later. And Barack Obama has gone to great lengths to suppress his die-hard left-wing communist passions. I've seen finally now, after about 3 or 4 years, and even after Breitbart's death, playbills of diehard communist plays featuring Barack Obama as the discussion leader after the play finally begin to emerge. And let's not forget that Barack Obama attended a extreme left-wing, Afrocentric, almost to the point of claiming that black people are the lost tribes of Israel church in Chicago for 20 years, whose pastor said, let's not bless America. Don't say God bless America. He said, GD America. Right? Okay. And there are plenty of photographs of Barack Obama with this pastor. But then when Barack Obama was pressed on this issue, even though Barack Obama admitted that he went to that church for 20 years, he actually said that he didn't remember a single sermon. How could you not remember a single sermon if you went to that church for 20 years? And the books that Obama reads by Fareed Zakaria, I believe, The Decline of America. Cheryl, this is going to throw you for a loop, but it actually fits. Barack Obama is a diehard communist who has been hired by Wall Street to be the front man for the disintegration of America, because the moneyed people, meaning the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, love communism and fund communism because within that structure, you have no competition. At this point in early July 2012, it appears that way. But I will say this. Both of your front runners, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, with Mittens Romney. I call him Mittens because he can't wait to get his mittens on more and more money. They're both compromised in different ways. I mean, Mittens Romney isn't a capitalist, or at least he wasn't. He was an extractionist. His participation in Bain Capital is a classic asset stripping operation where you buy a company, strip the assets for short-term capital, and you just consume one business after the other. And if you want proof of that rather extreme view, all you have to do is go to the internet and enter, Mitt Romney Bain Capital into Google Images. And you got to have a real big ego when you pose with your Bain Capital buddies and you got money coming out of your suit jackets and pockets and with all your buddies. I mean, yes. And what does that say about, your values? Yeah, it does. Because guess what? Volume 2 in my movie series, The Illusion of Money, starts with a Bible verse. It's a very familiar one. It says, the love of money is the root of what? There you go. Okay, first of all, you really do have to watch my movie, New World Order, Secret Societies, and Biblical Prophecy on YouTube for free. I have no shame in plugging it because I'm offering it for free. That'll give you a 2.5-hour background into the opening quarter of the big picture. I mean, the picture is that big. So having sort of primed the pump, in essence, you got to do a couple things. Number one, you got to live like there's no tomorrow and covet every precious minute of the day. And that doesn't mean in a fatalistic kind of sense, but not in a death wish kind of sense, but in a life wish kind of sense. I mean, are you really living when you're watching television for 30 plus hours a week? Turn it off. Turn it off. Please, people, I have gone without a television for 8 years now. I have a $5,000 video editing computer and no television. I'm not suffering. Trust me, there is life after television. Number two, keep in mind that I'm not in a position to give financial advice, but I'm only telling people what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I pulled all of my retirement funds out of anything to do with government promises, paper promises or electronic promises. I put it all into physical gold and physical silver coin, and I have it stored in a bank vault. So if anyone gets the idea to come after me, you won't get anything. And which is doing very, very well for me right now. Thank you very much. And when the United States economically crashes, not if, but when, that crash will be the biggest event in history, simply because the United States dollar is involved in everything. Now, when $20 doesn't buy you a loaf of bread anymore, what do you think is going to happen when people can't get their meds for their alleged psychotic breaks? They're going to have a break with reality. And what do you think is going to happen in society when a society that riots over the latest Air Jordan shoes can't get food because they can't afford it? So if you think that investing in physical gold and physical silver and food and water and protection is a paranoid idea, well then, you know what? We'll see you when the riots break out. If you think Rodney King was something, multiply that by 100. When people realize that the U.S. dollar is finally dead.